Go ahead.
If the great thinker despise mankind, I think this error there, but whatever, is for their laziness.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember this one. I saw it yesterday.
So he thinks Nietzsche just generally despises most people. He thinks they're like pottery. And if he doesn't want to belong to the mass, he needs to stop taking himself easily. What does it mean to stop taking yourself easily?
I really don't know. As I mentioned yesterday, I think that's a translation thing. I don't really understand. Like, I would need a translator to explain that more to me.
I can superimpose an interpretation, which is maybe like effortful work required to think out your own values, or not, I don't know if Nietzsche would say think, but will your own values.
Yeah.
And to follow them is difficult, something like that. But what does it mean? So what does it mean to become yourself or be thyself whenever he talks about that? Does that simply mean actualize your will, or some vague thing like that, or think through your own values? Is that essentially what it means when he says that?
More like actualize your will. Just actualize or make real what is your instinct, what is there to begin with, kind of that emotional drive within yourself already.
Okay. That does sound
and be
like
real to that. Yeah. The only thing with the sophists is that they thought everything reduced to language, that everything was a language game, that you can make any argument you want as long as you make the terms how you want them to be. Yeah. Nietzsche's going a bit deeper than like, yeah, our language has a lot to do with how we think, but he thinks that there is a nature to at least the way our feelings and drives go, that it isn't just boiled down to language, but there's something deeper about our will and our psychological drives that push us to be a certain way, and that we should live by that psychological nature.
Is there any difference between a psychological drive and a feeling or an emotion?
I'm just saying that I don't think so, but I'm saying that Nietzsche's grounding in something at least there, not just some language game, that there's something deeper than sophists would do. The sophists are just more basic, but Nietzsche's like, okay, there's something, a drive or a will, or not necessarily emotion, but like the underlying drive underneath you that pushes you to be what you are. And he thinks you should be that nature. Sometimes you're a weaker person, is fine to be. If that's what you are, then be that. Don't try to be weak, but then at the same time strong. If you're not, like, a sheep can't pretend to be a lion. A sheep is still a sheep.
Yeah.
Nor should a lion be a sheep either, because that's completely different to you too.
Right. Back to philosophy. Is the characteristic of a quantity in a thing, like, you can't, it's hard, like I couldn't say a cup has the characteristic of quantity. The characteristic quantity exists in a group, not an actual entity. I'm trying to get my head around that.
A few ways to do this. Aristotle thought of it as a quality is, or characteristic is predicated of a thing. That is, it is said of a thing, or it's about a thing, or it belongs to something. Not that it's like in it as much as it's something about it. It derives from something like that.
Okay. So then,
like if a truck is red, like if a truck is red, red is predicated of truck. The concrete thing is what's said of the concrete thing.
Okay. So things will have quantity as a characteristic, but then quantity in terms of number will be like always refers to like a grouping of things, just like you could call the ocean an ocean, when even though the ocean is like a lot of different areas and depth and different pools of water or whatever, right? Is it that's kind of thing? So you just kind of group together entities and you say all of them together have the characteristic of a certain quantity.
Well, we could distinguish quantities that pertain to the individual entity, or you could say quantities that pertain to a group.
Right.
I mean, if you're asking about the entity, the concept, or you're asking about like a quality of a concept or quantity of a concept or quantity about a particular, I mean, it's slightly different.
Okay, no, I get it now. So yeah, entities will have a characteristic of quantity. For example, a weight. That's a
There's
quantified
something
characteristic.
quantitative or something you attribute a number to.
But we can also, like, I don't know, I don't want to call it a non-concept, but like a group of concepts can have a certain characteristic, like a share, like of quantity. It's not in any, it's not part of any individual one. It's like in the abstraction of the group together. That's what I was trying to get my head around.
Like you were saying,
there's no entity of like the flock, but the flock of sheep, but you still say like that they, as in all of them together, have the characteristic of, let's say there's 200, but that it's not in any given sheep. I'm just trying to get my head around that. So it's we mentally group them.
Yeah, it's a grouping of some sort. Like it might not, that gets a bit complicated, because if you could call that a relational concept or relational attribute possibly, or relational
That's what I was
quantity,
trying to figure out. Yeah, is it
that
like,
could work? I would say it's a relational quantity, because there's a relationship among concretes or among more than one.
Right.
More than one thing, so it's relational. That having a flock is dependent on there being a relationship among sheep.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sort of like in front of, behind of is a relationship between two different entities.
Right.
So it's a concept of relationship. Right. And then a certain kind of quantity can be a concept of relationship, but it can also be a characteristic of a thing.
Yeah, it can go multiple ways.
Okay.
I mean, when we just discussed concept formation, we did see how there's many ways to organize the same thing, even though you can organize within a concept. And you try to go across concepts like furniture and chair and room and environments. It gets complicated with all the relationships.
Right. Okay. I think I've sufficiently got the level of clarity that's relevant to this inquiry.
Yes. Yes.
Borrowed that from Aristotle. Okay. This one.
I wonder if this is from Truth and Lies. That's what we read. It sounds like it might be.
So, yeah, it looks like it's cut out of context, because I don't quite get what is the secret of all culture. Like, does culture offer us something good? Because he's talking about here the base coin of education, providing these artificial limbs, wax noses, and spectacles. But what is the secret of culture then? It doesn't give anything. Like this looks like it's cut out of context, right?
Yeah, it's out of context.
Yeah. Okay. And what did you make of then the education providing people with artificial limbs, wax noses, and spectacles?
I think he's referring to his contemporary German style of doing education, and that education was wait, and that is goodbye, kiss. I don't really get it.
Okay, that's right. We'll let's go to the other one. Do another one. One should only speak where one cannot remain silent, and only speak of what one has conquered. The rest is all chatter.
I know that one. Let's see.
My interpretation is speak of that which you have actual knowledge about, and don't, when you don't have knowledge about something and you're not sure of your knowledge, ask questions instead. That's me superimposing, because I don't know, but that's what I
One
take
should only
from it.
speak. When can I remain silent? Yeah, like when you can't remain silent, it just sounds like when you feel compelled to speak, when it feels important. If you feel you can't remain quiet, then speak. But you should only speak when you're the confident, or when you have conquered something, or have mastered something. You should only speak of what you've mastered. Anything else is just noise.
Right. That kind of makes sense. It's like the Socratic line of you can, or even to take from the objectivist epistemology, you're like, if you speak of something that you're not really clear on knowing, you're like a parrot. It's noise. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So you should ask questions instead.
Yeah.
Pretty hard to implement. I like it though.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying the primary purpose of concepts is unit, economy, and condensation?
I would say so.
Yeah. All right, let's go to some history. Since you asked, I've put in some history questions.
Yeah.
From what I got, I looked into feudalism. Is it specific to, it seems like it's a hierarchical kind of political arrangement of society. It's a particular arrangement where you've got a king, you've got a nobility, and then serfs. So the king, the nobility do the conquering, then they enslave whoever they conquered, and they turn them into these workers of the land. But is it something that, do you know if it's something that specifically names Europe post-Rome? Because the arrangement doesn't seem that unique to Europe. Like there's all kinds of bizarre hierarchies where there's some subordinate person who can't do anything.
Yeah, I think it like refers to, there's Japanese feudalism. And I know.
Okay. So it's broader.
I mean, I don't know where else it's used besides Japan in Europe. Maybe a bit in China, but not too much. And I think Russia to an extent. But I think it's really centered on like Central Europe primarily.
Yeah, okay. Like you don't have Indian feudalism.
Yeah, not in that sense, no. I mean, that's why there's like the hierarchy of knights and kings and serfs and all that. It really is like a process of enslavement.
A process of what?
Would say enslavement.
Right.
Because the king decides everything.
Yeah.
And everyone is services to the pleasure of the king.
I was thinking
and
about
all money goes towards the king. So in a way, that's why people think, so I say capitalism is feudalism, but it was different because you were forced to. Like, otherwise, you're left and murdered, or literally banished and attacked or whatever.
I was thinking about, so this is in the context of World War II. Like, you know how they say, well, Neville Chamberlain, he tried to compromise and look what happened. But what was the alternative? Like, if he declared war on them when they said they wanted to integrate all the German-speaking people of Czechoslovakia into Germany, you're still going to get a war. And if they, like regardless of what happened, they're gonna get a war anyway, whether they let them take Czechoslovakia or not. So did it really make much of a difference at all?
Could it make a difference? I think if it could, I mean, I would think not, because if somebody has the means and the desire, they're basically just going to do it. Doesn't matter what. It would only turn the only function for Great Britain would be it's signaling what position it takes, signaling what stance or whether it could be an ally or a threat to others.
So
It's just signaling like their position in the world. I think that's
so
all they can do.
if that's true, then couldn't you say, well, you might as well try giving Czechoslovakia and just see what happens. It's either you're going to go to war or potentially not. Like, let's just see what happens. Like, give him Czechoslovakia, find out.
But then I would think, given the way Nazi Germany worked, showing strength or not trying to show strength is itself risky. Because you want to say, no, you can't, and resist would be a way to show that you have strength. But then failing to defend it is another issue, because then you would be weak if you failed to defend it.
Right.
And that's really what you're trying to do, I think, if you were Britain, you want to appear strong, because that's what Germany responds to, strength and power.
Back to
But I think that is
Aphorisms.
a common issue in like when conflict is appearing like you have the courage and strength to do something. Because then if you don't show it, people abuse you or take advantage of you, or someone
Right.
will. And that seems
Right.
like a common feature in much of history.
Yeah, okay. I guess without knowledge of more facts, it's hard for me to say. I don't know, maybe someone could tell me or give me an argument as to why it would have been better if they just declared war straight away, or like mass big disagreement. But
Yeah, I think in the case with dealing with like case with Germany, where it's a lot to do with autocrats at the time, it starts to become very psychological and less about the country per se as much as it is how does that individual autocrat think.
oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah. There's one person in power, and because he has an enormous amount of power, then it's more about his cycle. There's more, his psychology becomes very relevant. Okay.
Which could be the case like with Napoleon too, or even like Julius Caesar. Those are the people that like it's almost no longer about the politics as much as the psychological battles between individuals.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Cicero versus Caesar versus Cleopatra and Marc Anthony.
I don't know that history. Any Roman.
Yeah, I just say it's like powerhouses of history, all alive at the same time, fighting one another intellectually.
What do you mean?
They were all alive at the same time, actually fighting about the same thing.
Oh,
Like
Cicero, Caesar. Okay.
Yeah, Cicero's fighting his vision of Rome, Caesar for his, Anthony and Cleopatra for theirs. But it ends up just being none of them. It ends up being Caesar's nephew that takes over. So they all failed in the end. And Cicero was murdered. He was assassinated.
So was Caesar. That's all I know.
Yep. I mean, like they all were actually.
Ah.
But it's just interesting to note that, like, when you get more towards autocrats, it becomes very psychological.
Right.
Cicero wasn't a leader; he's still just a philosopher, but he had a lot of sway in the Senate.
Let's do this aphorism.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I did think, I don't know how much of this is Kant, because it's also sophists kind of had this view, like they don't know if there is a world. Why speak of reality? Just dispense with the
sounds
concept.
Like Plato. Yeah.
Okay. Why?
Like metaphysical world. Just because I think it just means like the ideal world or another world.
Ah.
I think it seems like an odd translation, probably. Like there were some weird translations of Nietzsche. Walter Kaufman is the best one, but anyway, I think that was a translation thing. But it does seem interesting the way he phrased it. Like he's just being ironic. It's like I don't think he really believes there is an absolute possibility of it, because he's like, oh, we all see things with our head. But what if we did chop off our head? Like he's being ironic there for sure. Like he's saying you got to kill yourself to do this in a
Right.
way.
And then what about yeah.
I mean, it's saying that we use our head to think, oh, and that could be like another world, but you can't chop it off. But could you really ever chop it off? So he's saying like the absurdity of even chopping it off to like even have that logical alternative is insane.
Is that sort of like stepping out of reality into a zero? You know that expression from
Yeah, it could be like
similar.
that. Yeah.
To prove existence by means of non-existence, by saying just step outside of whatever reality is,
Yeah.
prove it. And then this idea of like it's the equivalent to worry yourself with that kind of thing is like the equivalent of a sailor trying to do an analysis of salt water, because it's just, you don't need to know the chemical composition of salt in order to sail in a storm.
You don't.
In a chemical composition of water.
Like, okay, let's say you did prove that there's another world. It's like it's utterly pointless to even think about it anyway.
Yeah, so what?
You could cut off your head and think, and then try to be like, free yourself from this bias. But what's the point? You cease living. You cease everything. You cease your drives. You cease your passions. You cease everything.
Right. Sort of like if the sailor would, there's a storm coming and the sailor goes into his little room and starts doing analysis of the water.
Yeah, that is very much Nietzsche. Like he looks down on academics that merely analyze to analyze. It should do something for your life, like in a way like either more passionate or more joyous or whatever.
Right.
That if you do it without just in this emotionless, detached way, is either impossible or insane.
Right.
Or not even insane, just utterly void of anything of meaning. Like you'd rather you be insane than void of meaning.
Okay, so back to Germany. They, so they took Czechoslovakia and then they invaded Poland. So Germany invaded Poland. And so they ended up in war anyway. But I guess going to what you said, like there may be a difference if you have more historical knowledge to say it, how this would have affected Hitler's psychology if Britain opposed them right from the beginning. But
yeah.
Okay.
And on the other hand, like he had such a drive to do those things it almost seemed pointless. Like he had this strength of will and a way of ruling Germany that it wouldn't matter. It was just so good. The army was just that good. It wouldn't matter. They'll just annihilate everyone. Doesn't even matter if they tried to thinking that it wouldn't have mattered. So what do you do in a situation like that? I'm not even sure.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it probably would not have mattered what anybody did. It's just what really did happen is that they got tired out, that they couldn't maintain themselves, and that's it. It collapsed on itself.
So this is about the US. Originally, the US had this policy in the, I think it was, so in the Monroe Doctrine, they said not that long after the founding of the states, they said that they wanted to be politically separate from the rest of the world and not have the rest of the world interfere, and to retain that kind of independence and separateness. And then in World War I, that switched. And so this statement is saying, historians say, well, they entered it because submarines were attacked on US ships, so that was enough provocation to go to war. And then this person says, but none of the things these historians say about like our submarine attack or whatever justifies breaking this policy of political separation. Ultimately, it's only some new concept of American-European relations is the explanation. It's not, oh, okay, they attacked a ship, so let's go to war, and that justifies it. It's that there's some new motivating power for the US getting involved politically in other countries. What do you think of that statement?
It seems that they already violated it in the Spanish-American War 20 years before. I mean, if that was the argument, it's like it already happened. So I don't quite follow. I mean, about continued violation of it, because they kind of backed off a bit of foreign relations when Teddy Roosevelt was no longer president. Well, even after, before he was president.
Yeah.
But it seemed to be that, why would they violate it? Well, for one, I think the US was going away from its founding principles around that time period anyway, because of Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt too. Although he had some good things, he also was a trustbuster and kind of pulled away from previous ways of thinking. Like the entire world was that way, from Europe to America to Mexico to China. Like all these places were significantly changing to a modern context and changing away from what they used to be almost universally, because changing technology, philosophy, and all that. The same way why Nietzsche wrote what he did, everything he did. He was so much changing of the world, so much to see that I think it's that just loss of principles in a way that lead this as a general trend for all countries. Like they lose track of their values and try to seek world domination for, I don't know why, maybe it's because there's been more potential at that time period. It's more chaos. I don't know why, but it seemed to be what happened.
Okay, so let's do another one of these. Intellect and morality. One must have a good memory to be able to keep the promises one has given. One must have strong powers of imagination to be able to have pity. So closely is morality bound to the quality of the intellect. I didn't quite make the connections here between suddenly we're going from memory to imagination and pity. And then they all seem like I wasn't able to make the connections between these different sentences.
Intellect and morality. Well, I think this is in Genealogy of Morals, I think. So he's talking about keeping promises one is given, so in a way that memory is part of our moral development, because it promises have to do with like creating obligations. And he's trying to describe this process of going from obligation to person to obligation to God. But the point is that promises are the root of our morality. That promising one and then violating the promise is often seen as a moral violation, or at least that's where morality derives. So that's one aspect of why he's saying that. So good memory is a matter of is good morality in that sense, because you can keep your promises, you'll be seen as a good person in a primitive sense, say like early civilization. People get mad at you for making a promise. As a strong part of imagination. So I mean, this is continuing that moral analysis. Like having pity is often seen as a moral feeling the moral sadness or some moral regard for somebody less well off. It might have to also do with imagining oneself in that position. That to feel pity implies that you see something pitiable, that you see something you could suffer too. And that's another aspect of morality, that a moral, say, desire or drive comes from that power to imagine that pity. That's what he's saying morality is. In these both senses, these intellectual qualities are bound to morality because they deal so closely to how moral feelings have developed. and moral philosophy has developed.
Is that sort of rooted in this do unto others as you would do unto yourself,
Yes.
some whatever that
He's
statement is?
explaining where that comes from, or
Yeah, okay.
what the psychological nature of that is. So he's not explaining in terms of these moral instincts, but that there is a history, that there's a developmental process throughout culture that we can look at. And that's what genealogy and morals is about. He looks at this historical process of developing moral codes. So it's
Brandon
part of
says-
a much wider, deeper Nietzsche scholarship. And it's a
Got
tough
it.
book
Okay.
to read, but
I barely got, well, I tried to get through Beyond Good and Evil, but I stopped. So it doesn't look like any of these are aphorisms. They're just pulled out of context quotes, but
some of them are just quotes. A few are the aphorisms, like he has a few two-liners. And the link I showed you, Beyond Good and Evil, there were like 3 pages of one-liners.
oh, I do have the book, so I might
Yeah.
even reference whatever pages
Yeah.
you looked at.
Yeah.
Brandon, I was reading 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, and Brandon said, I thought this was pretty interesting, like that the idea of love your neighbor as you love yourself. He's like, that's precisely what people do, and that's the problem, because people hate themselves, so they hate others as they hate themselves. And I thought that was quite smart. It's true. Like, there's something to that. Yeah. Let's see if I
Yeah,
wanna...
that's a lot what I'm reading in Rhetoric by Aristotle. Like there were like 10 chapters on emotions and saying all these ways people think. Some of it's common sense, but it's useful to see it written down. And he does say things like why people pity others and why they feel angry at others, and
Right.
what's envy, and what even mentioned small-souled people. He practically describes second-handers. They're desirous of
interesting.
everything, and they're envious of everything because everything seems great compared to themselves. They want more because they feel inferior. That'd be the only way to make themselves seem great or decent, is to have what others have. So they hate themselves in a way,
So they're jealous.
essentially.
It sounds like he identified, so for anger, for example, did he identify the root of a sense of injustice?
Feeling belittled in an unjust way is anger. Or feeling anger at, or feeling like you've been belittled unjustly is anger. There are other reasons to feel injustice. Makes you feel other things. Just it's a certain kind of injustice feeling.
What do you make of this? I don't know if this is pulled out of context, but I couldn't make sense of it, and I was curious.
I think in a way he's saying that people who do that aren't special. Like if you if you treat a criminal like a scoundrel, often people doing that are scoundrels themselves. I think that's kind of what he's saying.
Okay, so maybe this is pulled out of somewhere, but basically the point is some people are punishable, but they're not punished, and but he says our crime against criminals is we treat them like scoundrels. Oh, our crime. Okay, we're punishable, but we're not punished for treating them like scoundrels. So I don't know, how else would he propose we treat criminals?
I don't know if he has a proposal. It's almost like he's
okay.
just throwing a bomb at you, just try to get you to feel bad. Like, what? I'm treating a criminal wrong? It's like, what are you talking about? Just it's like it's like a failed joke, like a
Right.
stand-up comic, like the one failed joke. It's like, okay, fine, didn't work, didn't laugh.
The skin of the soul, just as the bones, flesh, intestines, blood vessels are enclosed by skin, which makes the sight of man bearable. So the stirrings and passions of the soul are covered up by vanity. It is the skin of the soul. As in
That's a
pride.
good one. No, vanity, just like, well,
Vanity. I
vanity, I
looked it
think in
up.
this case, is
Vanity.
just saying inflated feeling of appearance.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, yeah, I see.
It doesn't necessarily seem bad here. Just a vanity and like wanting to appear good, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it's kind of vivid here. Like
Like
it's
a
covering
defense
something.
value.
Yeah, that's what kind of what he's saying. That underneath it's ugly or horrifying. Maybe not
Right.
ugly, but what you don't want to admit is there.
But he likes stirrings and passions, doesn't he? But in this case, he's speaking
Yes.
about specific kinds.
Well, he would be probably say that we don't need to be ashamed of it. We don't need to make it bearable. We should
Right.
just embrace it. Other people try to make those passions bearable. But he
Right.
says, embrace them. Don't make it bearable. Like live with them, embrace them, make them, push them. Don't deny them. It's kind of what he's saying.
Right.
I mean, I could see that most people that they don't want to admit their deepest passions, maybe out of shame, or they don't think they're good enough, or whatever it might be.
You could say to you could say that. I don't know if I could. I don't.
Well,
Some people
some
don't have
cases,
that many passions. I don't know. Maybe they do. I don't know. It's I don't know enough about. I haven't analyzed enough people to.
well, I think it's a worthwhile question. You might be
Yeah.
right. Some people just lack a passion, so that might be different. But there are definitely people, though, of course, who do fear something and do things out of shame, or avoid things out of shame, rather.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's true. I agree with that. Yeah, but then the passion is like it's not a fire. It's just like an ember, just
Yeah.
sitting there, heated.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's more fundamental to atomism, mechanistic materialism or pluralism?
Probably mechanistic for the most part, because that's the way Aristotle argued against them usually. They never really talked about their pluralism as much as their mechanism, as much as their materialism, I mean.
Actually, I just had this thought now. What about Thales? Thales was a mechanistic materialist, so maybe the
Probably.
more fundamental is pluralism, but then they are mechanistic materialists. You get my reasoning? Because Thales said everything is water. That's mechanistic materialism. And then they said, no, everything is lots of elements. And then so the fundamental, if I'm trying to use this reasoning, is pluralism if you want to distinguish them as philosophers, but mechanistic materialism is part of that. It depends on the context, right? Like,
I think so.
mm,
I mean, I guess it depends what you're trying to look at. I mean, fundamental in terms of the constituents of the universe, or fundamental in terms of
philosophy.
the way they think. I mean, as far as the way they think, I'd say mechanistic materialism.
Yeah,
But as far as
okay.
what's fundamental to reality is pluralism.
Okay.
Because pluralism would be the nature of reality itself, what it
Right.
means for reality to exist even.
Right.
Not only is it the mechanistic materialism is the way in which the constituents of reality function, which is slightly logically derivative. But as far as their thinking, I think they reason from that more so. That the premises are that mechanistic thing, which then leads them to pluralism. That's how they conclude it.
Yeah,
That's part of their arguments.
I agree. So then the essential will depend on the context. Like if I put them together on the table with Thales and who else? I don't know if Parmenides was a mechanistic materialist, but yeah, if I put them on the table with if I put them on No, but Democritus is pluralist as well. But if I put them on the table with Thales, for example, then the essential is pluralism. But if I put them on the table with Aristotle and Thales, then maybe it's, I don't know, it's mechanistic materialism.
Yeah, you could organize it differently. Like if you
Yeah.
had a book that was organizing philosophy, you could have pluralist as one category and split it up more between the mechanistic materialists, or you could have mechanist and then materialist and non-materialist, or whatever would work out. Because
Right.
that would be in terms of a particular kind of belief. Or you could categorize in terms of what is the way they do philosophy, or what is their focus as thinkers. So their processes, you could organize it that way. So, but not all pluralists we think the same, but all the materialists or all the atomists are one style of philosophy. And then say the sophists are another style, the Platonists are another, the Heracliteans another. So how you organize that? Because it could be whichever, it could be their methods of philosophy, or it could be their metaphysical beliefs, for example.